welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Guthrie.
And we have a very special guest today, David Travis from User Focus. Hi, David.
Hi, Guthrie.
Susan, do you want to talk about how you know?
Why is David here?
Oh, well, that's okay. Yes.
Is that what you want me to talk about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually haven't, David, we haven't met in person, right?
No, but I've read all of your books, Susan. So
that's not true. No,
I don't know. We could quiz him because there's something back in the last century he probably doesn't know.
So she has like her popular books, but then she has some more obscure ones from back in the day that if you really had, that would be a collector. I don't even think they're in print anymore.
Yeah. No, anyway.
Okay.
Thank you for reading my books. And yeah, so we know about each other and yet we've never met. It's kind of amazing that we've never been speaking at the same conference or something like that, given the close relatedness of the work we do. So I'm really happy to have you on. I think it's going to be fun. And you were saying before we started recording, you had mentioned that you've listened to some of our podcast episodes, so you feel like you know us, and yet we don't really know you. So that's
it's that bizarre thing, particularly like when you hear a radio presenter and you get to know their voices and you listen to them every day and you kind of get a good idea of what they're like and you feel you've got a relationship with them. And obviously, if you met them in the street, they would think that you were just some mad random stranger. And it's kind of like that with you and Guthrie, really. I feel I know you because I've been listening to. I've binged listened to quite a few of the podcasts.
Well,
so.
one of the things that I think I've noticed is that I think for both of us, but myself especially, Susan, you can speak for yourself. It's very hard when I'm talking, doing like public speaking or I guess podcast speaking, which is sort of like this. It's sort of the same thing. Extemporaneous speaking, I suppose, is maybe the official category. It's very hard for me not to just be myself in a very vulnerable way. So I do feel like, if someone listens to me talk or something, they would kind of understand me as a person pretty easily, because I find it difficult to wrap
you don't
it
have
in a cold
professional
the
persona?
cold professional persona. I'm not sure if I do a great job with that.
Really? You mean it's the real you I've been talking to the whole time? I didn't know that. So, David, you are speaking to us from the UK, right?
That's correct.
And you said you were looking out over an idyllic pastoral view. Well, you didn't use those words. I'm using those words.
Yeah, well, it's a good interpretation, I think. So I'm working from home today because I'm traveling tomorrow, and before traveling, but it's quite a long journey I'm on tomorrow, and before traveling, I always like to have the day before working from home if I can. And it's a glorious day in where I live. I'm looking out, I can see trees and the sun's shining, and there are birds in the garden. So I could be you're in Chicago, aren't you?
Well, Guthrie's in Chicago, but I'm in Wisconsin, and I'm looking out over a very similar scene.
Okay.
So we get the rural scene, and Guthrie gets
Let's see. I got a
downtown Chicago.
I got a house that I look at on one side, and my driveway, more concrete buildings on the other.
All right, so that's the setting for this conversation. So, David, I'm just really excited to have you on, and I want to hear. I mean, there's so much I want to ask you. I'm not sure where to start, but I guess I'm going to start
with an introduction about
David
and his history.
Oh, really?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, David, I'll tell you the little bit that I know about you, and then you can fill us in on the big gaps that I've missed. How's that?
I'll go ahead. I'm really excited to see what your picture of me is.
So David is a very well-known user experience / psychologist consultant. He works for, and I think maybe founded, but I'm not sure about that, a company called User Focus, which is based in London. And he has a PhD in psychology. Does this sound familiar, Guthrie? And he's written several books. He has a brand new one out called, fairly brand new from the first of the year, called Think Like a UX Researcher. And we're definitely going to talk about that on this podcast because I think UX research is not only very important, it seems to be suddenly a very hot and groovy and in topic these days. Let's see, what else was it I wanted to mention? Oh, and like we do, Guthrie, he is really big on online video training. And so probably a lot of the people listening in, if they haven't, taken one of his online video courses, they've probably heard about his online video courses. So, David, I don't know. That's kind of like it. I don't know what music you like to listen to or whether you have cats or anything.
That's pretty good, actually. I think if I was asked to list the highlights, I think I would have come up with pretty much what you've come up with, really. I think the only thing I'd add to that is the length of time I've been working in user experience. I counted up the other day.
Yeah, that's scary.
And I'm 58 now. And basically, I started when I was about 27, 28, working in the field. So about 30 years, really. And I mean, like you, I mean, I think we work in a field which I think to people outside the field, they kind of think it's something that happened within the last 5 years. The perception is it's a very new discipline, and kind of grew out perhaps of the internet. And I think they ignore the fact that it's based on stuff going back, well, at least till the Second World War, but maybe even before that, with the idea of focusing on the users of a system rather than on the system itself. So we both got this long history working in the field of when I started, I guess it was called, in the UK it was called ergonomics. In the US, right. I think it was human factors.
Yeah, I didn't know it was called ergonomics.
Yeah,
I haven't heard
yeah.
that one.
In the UK, it was. Over here in the US, ergonomics tended back then, and probably still does, to refer to the physical, aspects like how large is the normal worker's hand. And therefore, what size should the knobs and tools be so that they can effectively use them, right? And so we've had a different definition of ergonomics on this side, I think, than you guys have. What it was called when I first started was man-machine interaction.
Oh, that's a politically incorrect term.
Correct. And then it was called human factors, and then it kind of went from there. But yeah, I think it's, you have your own history. Everyone has their own history and their own mindset. And I often forget that other people don't have that history and mindset, that they do think it's relatively new. And so it's always interesting to me to talk to people and see, what's their view of the history of what we're doing. Yeah, and I think, I remember. Did you have this view? I remember many years ago, because my history is similar to yours and goes back quite a long way. When you almost, in fact, I'm surprised I didn't know you before, because you almost knew everyone in the field. I knew everyone, at least every consultant, anyone who worked, didn't work for a large corporation doing this work. Everyone who was an external consultant in the US, we knew each other because there were like a handful. There just weren't that many people, so.
Yeah, and that's certainly changed. Uh,
So tell what's like the newest thing you're working on? What's like you finish? We're going to talk about the book, but let's hold off on that for just a second. Build anticipation. So, what are you working on now? Now that the book is done?
Yeah, you know what I want to say. Here's what I want to tell you. I want to tell you that I'm working on artificial reality. I'm working on virtual reality actually in head-up displays in cars, and autonomous driving systems and artificial intelligence. And I'd like to tell you I'm working on all of those things because obviously they're very sexy, they're very modern. But I'm working on, in fact, as I've worked longer in the field, I find I focus more and more on the fundamentals and on the simple stuff. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that, like my business has changed quite a lot since I set User Focus up in 2001. So initially, we were predominantly a consulting firm in human factors and user-centered design, and then over time, we started introducing training into that mix. But then over time, the mix became more and more training and less consultancy until about maybe 5-6 years ago, when really there was a switch, and the training became much more important for our business than the consulting. And that's not just because we were promoting the training more. It was because there was a change in the industry. I think that there was a point when early on, organizations, they kind of just needed some people to come in and do this bizarre work that human factors, ergonomics, usability people did. They didn't have anybody with those skills. They wanted somebody to come in, do an assignment, and then throw the work over the wall, and then they would take action on it or not, as the case may be. But then what happened more recently is that teams now realise they need those kind of skills in-house. They don't want to recruit them with consultants. They want people permanently on site with those skills. But now they've got the people, but the people don't have the skills yet. But they've got lots of people that are at the very beginning of their user experience career. And as a consequence, I found that my work now, I spend more time working with early stage user experience people. There's also some work I do with more advanced UX researchers as well, but predominantly it's with those early stage people, and they need to know the fundamentals. I need to help them know how to do field visits, how to run a usability test, how to analyze the data, how to present the results back so that they're persuasive. So in fact, I'd like to say that I'm working on these really great high-tech new products. But in fact, I think what I'm doing is actually more important. I think what I'm doing is trying to create an army of foot soldiers that can go out and do this work rather than trying to be the one person that does all of it. I think it makes more sense to try and build a culture where you can get more people doing that. So that's a long way of answering that question about what am I working on. What's the most exciting thing I'm working on at the moment? So that's the answer.
Well, because we've definitely seen sort of a similar thing where, my understanding is that, there weren't that many UX professionals a while back, and so if you were a UX professional, man, were you a professional? And there were all these very highly skilled, very smart kind of people doing very kind of advanced UX work. But now everyone is getting into UX, and what it's actually done is, even though UX is more popular than ever, it's felt like the median knowledge of any one UXer actually has gone down as sort of people are beginning into the field. And so there is it kind of makes sense that you're going back to more basic UX work, because that does seem to be the need
Yeah, and one of the things I
bring
find
people in.
when we talk to people, Guthrie, like who contact us because they want us to come in and teach a workshop, for instance, a lot of times what they say is that, they have a UX team, but people are coming from such different backgrounds. Some of them are new, some of them are quite experienced, but there's all these gaps in their knowledge and ability. So you have someone who's been doing, interaction design work, but they never really learned much about research. Or you have someone who's doing research, but they don't know a lot about interaction design. And so sometimes the training we do is to try and fill those gaps in for the team. Do you find that, David?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I was listening to one of your episodes. I think it was when you were speaking with Nick Fine, and you mentioned that on one of the courses that you ran, you had somebody on the course with a PhD in a science discipline, and you also had someone on there with an art history degree. And I think it has captured that breadth of interest, hasn't it? There's a wide range of people have come into it from a wide range of backgrounds, but as a consequence, what they don't have is a common terminology when they're talking about design, and particularly design research. And I think one of the reasons this term UX it's almost become in some ways it can become a bit of a meaningless term because it means different things to different people. And instead, what I try to do in my courses is help people understand that user experience is not a thing. It's a process that you need to go through, which incorporates research at the beginning, an understanding of user needs, and then developing into what we might think of as prototyping or early design before we start doing usability testing. But the focus is on trying to get people to grasp that common terminology, to have that common understanding of terms like interaction design. What does it mean? Information architecture. How does that differ from interaction design? And get them to then at least afterwards, when they have a discussion amongst the team to decide what they need to do next, they've got that common terminology they can use, and then they can use that to build upon. So certainly that's one of the aims I have when I go in and work with clients. And I'm certainly finding that there's this incredible breadth of people that are now working in the field, which is a good thing. I think if you go back like 30 years, Susan, you'll know that in order to get clients to do this work was such an uphill battle, because they often didn't appreciate, or at least they didn't see the connection between having something that was user-centered and bottom line profits. But with the introduction of the internet, then it became obvious, because if your product wasn't usable, if your website's not usable, people won't order your product. So there's a clear one-to-one relationship. But back in the day when VCRs were busy flashing 12 o'clock because people didn't know how to set the clocks, I remember working with a major manufacturer of VCRs at the time who said, well, all of the effort that I was encouraging them to go into in order to design their VCR so that it was going to be very easy to use was pointless, because people wouldn't discover these features until after they purchased the product. And what they wanted was things to make people purchase the product. So frankly, they were less bothered once someone had purchased it and struggled to use it. And it was a harder sell back in those days, to try and get people to take this stuff on board. It was always, I found, just very large companies who had a vested interest in making sure things were usable. Like
often it was if there had been a disaster.
They needed that, didn't they? They needed a product failure or worse in order for them to realise, hold on, we need to take action. And they were all at that kind of very low level of maturity in working out how important it was. Whereas nowadays it's completely different. I mean, it's very rare now that I find myself having to go in and sell the idea of user experience to a company. It does still happen, but It's much of a rarer situation today compared to how it used to be. And that's partly, I think, because we've got this wide range now of people who all think they know what user experience is, rightly or wrongly. I mean, they may be wrong, but at least they feel it's a good thing. So the kind of the term user experience, although I think there's a problem, which is it means different things to different people, one common thing is that term tends to be considered to be an important thing. Whatever user experience means to them, it's important. They know that it matters, but they may have a differing opinion on how they would define it.
Yeah, I actually had a situation once many years ago where I got a phone call from a very large insurance company, and the guy on the phone said, I hope you can help us. I just had everyone in my call center said that if we didn't fix the software, they were going to unplug the computers and walk out of the room.
Excellent.
And he's like, "Can you help us?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And I was like, "Yeah, right on. Unplug the computers. I like it." So, yeah, things have changed a lot. But I agree with you that the definitions are tough. I teach. I'm an adjunct professor at University of Wisconsin, one of my kind of local campuses, and so it's always interesting to me. One of the reasons I like doing that is it's in the whole design thinking world, there's this idea of interviewing extreme participants.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's good. I think it's something that we don't do. We haven't traditionally done enough.
Right. We've always, let's do the target.
Exactly.
The representative user.
There's this belief that what you need to do is have a representative sample, and when you've only got like 5 or 10 people in your sample, that's kind of a ludicrous objective to have anyway. But I think having those extremes it helps you understand what the limits of your product is. Sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, so I feel like by teaching college students, and then it's part of an extreme. So it forces me to think about what we do and how we explain it in a different way, and it's not that these are usually juniors and seniors in college, and it's not that they don't know about UX, and it's certainly not true that they're not tech savvy, because they're very tech savvy, but just they have a really different view on UX. And these are people who some of whom are studying user experience, like that's what they're focusing on in their degree. Others of whom are just regular computer science majors, and sometimes people who are not computer science majors at all. And it just gives me a different view on how people are seeing our field, and it's really valuable for me, and it forces me to change the language that I use and the way that I talk about it. So it's interesting. It's always interesting, I think, to come up against your own, which is what happens to me, my own cognitive biases about the field, my own definitions that I don't realize, I have, but have never explained to other people, and keeps me on my toes to do that. And, you teach a lot, and you do the online courses as well, and then I'm assuming that the best way to understand something is to try and teach it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think, actually, I think there are two ways that I try and learn stuff. One is by teaching it, and the other is by writing about it. So on the User Focus website every month, I usually publish a new article, and that article is really, although ostensibly it's there to kind of try and help people understand something. The real motivation for those articles is really me trying to work out how to explain something so people can get it. I mean, so sometimes I'll be on a course and someone will ask a question, which I'll provide an answer to. And for one reason or another, that answer is not very satisfying. Either I'm not satisfied with the answer, or I can tell the student has just doesn't agree with me, or hasn't understood the point I'm trying to make, and that'll bother me, and then I'll come back and I'll travel back and I'll be thinking about how should I explain that, and then that becomes that kind of seed of an idea then becomes an article, and it I think it makes the practice of consulting better as well, because I think if you only do consultancy, often you can't articulate why you're doing the things you're doing, because you become so practiced as an expert. You just know that this is the right approach. I've seen this work in another client's organization. We did it this way, it worked that way, let's do it again. But you're not it can be very practice led rather than very theory led. And I think the advantage of training as well, which is why I like the combination of consulting and training. When you train as well, you're able to make sure that your consulting practice is theory driven. And when you teach people, you can provide practical examples, case studies, which bring the whole thing to life. So it's a powerful combination, I think, having to teach the stuff that you actually consult in.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I think also that I like in the university setting, a lot of time if you're teaching the online video courses, which we do a lot of, and you often get feedback, but you may not get as much feedback as you would like or need. And when I'm teaching in the college setting, for instance, I gave a test during my, one of the tests in my courses this past semester. And everyone in the room except one person got this question about choice architecture wrong. And the distractor in the multiple choice test that they picked showed me exactly what the misunderstanding was. And I was so surprised that everyone got this wrong. And so, it's like, obviously, I did not explain that very well. And it also brought up to me, I thought it was so interesting because they confused choice architecture with information architecture. Well, I had never realized that would be an easy confusion to make. I mean, they both have the word architecture. They're both about choices.
Yeah.
Right. And yet that had never dawned on me that might be a common confusion if it's not explained well.
I've always had trouble with a lot of the terms that are used, and I complain about them sometimes because
in the UX terms or the
whole
because choice architecture is not a UX term.
Well, the whole thing.
Okay.
Because they are like some of the terms self-story, very very clear. Right?
Yeah.
But some of them are really quite complicated, and these concepts are hard enough already to explain. But and
then give them a weird name, right?
Yeah, exactly. That don't so choice architecture I actually kind of like.
Well, that's because you're a behavioral economist.
Well, that's a really, really, really tough concept.
It is. Well, apparently it is. I didn't think it was a tough concept.
What's the better name?
What was interesting. Right?
That's
what?
What's a better name for that? That's the problem.
I don't know. And to me, it made sense. And I understood the concept. And so apparently I taught it really fast. Like I took just a few minutes and gave 2 examples, and that was not enough. That's what I discovered. That was not enough. So, yeah, teaching is fun. Yeah, and teaching is fun, and writing is fun. Now, here we have on the call 3 writers. So, Guthrie's just finishing up his first book, and which will be published shortly. And I've written several. David, you've written several. So I want to talk about your book, Think Like a UX Researcher. And I know you've probably had this question. I've been on so many. I've been interviewed so many times that people want to talk about, the writing process. So tell me about whether you like writing books or not. Like, is it a love-hate thing? Do you love it? Do you hate it? What's your...
No, it's a hate thing, I think.
It's a what?
Hate thing. I hate writing books.
Yeah.
I mean, it's because I wrote my first book. It was called Effective Color Displays, and that was published in 1986, 87. And it came about because I was doing a PhD at the time, and my specialism was color vision. And at the time, which shows how old I am, color displays were just being introduced into the office.
They were brand new, very exciting.
And a guy called Andrew Monk, who works in the field, was editing a series of books, and he said, "Hey, we need someone to write a book on color displays." And I didn't even know about this field, human-computer interaction, back in those days. But that was my first introduction, and then I wanted to write the book because I felt it would be a good way. As I was at the beginning of my career, I thought that would be a good way to get my name known. And the other thing was, I could go into clients and I could show them a copy of my book, and that would persuade them to commission me to do work. I saw the book as being a great statement of credibility, and it was a nightmare to write. I hated writing it, but I managed to finish it, and then it didn't lead to any consulting work. Nobody was interested.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know if whatever I needed for credibility, the book really wasn't the thing. By the time I got in to see the client, they weren't interested in. Now, despite that, I then thought I'd write a second book, which was called E-commerce Usability. E-commerce usability, crikey, it takes you back, doesn't it? The whole idea of e-commerce, it sounds like video cassette recorders and long playing albums. But anyway, when I wrote that book, again, that was even harder to write. And it took, I remember sitting in my home office in a different home at the time without great rural views of trees. And it was like the proverbial getting blood out of a stone. Because I like to write very concisely. And that's one reason I like writing blog posts, because I can be concise, and I don't like to write to be expansive. I like to be as concise as I can, and I just couldn't get the word count needed, so I had to spend ages kind of beefing up what I was saying, kind of adding "and so that" kind of things to all of the paragraphs I was writing to make it longer. And when I finished that book, I worked out the amount of money that I made from the book itself in terms of sales, that I would have earned more money if I'd worked behind a bar on minimum wage than I would have from the royalties from that book. And I said, I'm never going to write another book again. And then recently, I've got a good friend of mine called Philip Hodgson, who is also runs his UX consulting company called Blueprint Usability. He's based in Chicago, actually.
He is?
And yeah, he's British, and I've known him for a long time, ever since he used to work at Motorola, really, back in the 90s. And I don't know whose stupid idea it was to write a book, whether it was my idea or his. But I thought, if I can get him involved, then it won't be so painful writing the book. I can get Philip to do all of the work, and I can just kind of act more like an editor.
Did it work?
No, it didn't.
No, I was going to say, I've tried that. That doesn't work.
Yeah, I thought, but actually having writing with somebody else, which I would have thought beforehand would have been a bad idea, was actually a really good idea, because not only did it mean that there was some times when I could coast and I could let Philip write the next few parts of the book and then send them to me to review, and then that would galvanize me and get me really motivated to write some of my own stuff. So as a consequence, we from beginning to end, we finished that book in 3 months, which is, my other books that were like 9 months to a year, and it was painful. This was 3 months, and it was relatively easy as well. So, and it was. I'm so proud of that book as well compared to the other two. I mean, the other two I'm proud of in the sense that I think the books are good. I mean, look at them now. The first one seems vaguely academic. The second one, perhaps not as advanced as I thought it was at the time. But this particular one, I'm really proud of. I take it down from the shelf and I flick through it. And one of the things we added to each of the chapters, I don't know if you've seen the book, Susan or Guthrie, but at the end of each chapter, we have a series of kind of discussion points. So there are about 80 sections of these throughout. And for about, I forget, maybe 40 or 50 of these peppered throughout the book. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we get people to reflect on the stuff that we've written. So it's, again, this combination of kind of consulting and training and getting people to understand the kind of things that they've read. And it's great when you read them because it's like an exam question. And you read them and it really gets you thinking about, well, what would I do in that situation? So, for example, there might be there could be a chapter that we've written about providing feedback to stakeholders. And at the end of that chapter, there'll be questions about the approach that we've recommended. And then we ask people to reflect on a time when they've needed to report back on their research and they found it hasn't gone to plan. How would they adapt some of the things we've talked about in this essay so that it would help? And those prompts are, I think, personally, when I read the book, I read the prompts at the end, the questions at the end, rather than the essays themselves, because I find them really interesting. They really get your brain going. And we kind of came up with that idea because there was the book Steve Portugal wrote a while back called Dead Doorbells and Batteries, Dead Batteries and Doorbells, you know the one. Yes. But in that, he has a bunch of different people that have written separate essays, but then he writes another essay at the beginning of each of those sections where he summarizes really what those individual essays are about. And we took that idea and used that, but then thought, well, how could we turn this into a series of questions for readers instead? So the upshot, the long answer to this question is I hate writing books, but this final book worked out. It was a much more enjoyable experience, and I think the reason is because I had a co-author and because we thought of a different way of putting a book together with these kind of questions at the end, which made it really motivating rather than just simply grinding out more content.
Yeah. And I find, I haven't asked that kind of question of a lot of authors. I just remember I was talking with Steve Krug once, Steve Krug, who wrote,
of course, yeah,
Don't Make Me Think and Rocket Surgery Made Easy and so on. And, he's been such a popular writer in the field of usability. His book, Don't Make Me Think, I mean, it's many years old and still really selling a lot. So he's been really successful at it. And he told me he hates writing books. Like it is the most horrible, painful thing he can think of to do.
And it's interesting because you look at Steve's books and they're really thin. And I think I wonder if he has the same problem that he kind of when he writes, it's very concise. And he's often publishers kind of they want you to pad things out and kind of increase the page count, and sometimes you don't want to. Naturally, you might be very concise in the way you express things, and that's certainly the case with Steve's books. I think because they are very concise and very powerful.
Yeah. And if you, I mean, for people who haven't worked with a publisher. Which is, I think, happening less and less as the publishing industry is struggling. But when you work with a publisher, they give you the page count before you start writing the book. At least that's been my experience. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So, it's like this book is 244 pages. And if you have more to say, too bad. And if you don't have enough to say, too bad. You've got a contract which says you will deliver this book by this date and it will have this many pages. And you often don't control the font size either. So it's not like you can just make things really large.
Yeah, we had this discussion with our publisher to begin with, because they gave us a page count and we said, well, how many words to a page? And it was a long time before we could get an answer from them about how many that should be. You think, how bizarre is that? What a way to express the length of... It was like weighing it, wasn't it? It should weigh half a kilogram or something.
But we're not going to tell you what weight the paper is.
Exactly.
This is how much it should weigh. Yeah, I know. And, we've turned to the last book I did, which is actually a second edition of a previous book. We self-published, and the book Guthrie's doing is largely self-published. So I think that's what we're freeing ourselves a little bit from some of that by doing it ourselves. But let's talk about the book Think Like a UX Researcher. So what I decided to do
was buy a copy.
Oh, no, I have a copy. But what I decided to do for the podcast was actually bring the table of contents up on a screen. So just say that's because I just decided that would be easier for me while I'm got my microphone and my cup of coffee and everything on the desk. So I'm just trying to think about what I want to talk about here. I guess tell me what in here do you think is might be unusual, or people who, if someone picks up a book, someone says, yeah, you should learn more about UX research. So they read this book. But what in here do you think is perhaps something that they might not expect to see in the book?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things. First of all, there's an initial section, we've called it Setting the Stage, where we talk about basically what good UX research looks like. So what does a good program of UX research look like? And the reason I think that's one reason that's unique is because often people dive straight into doing the field visits, running the usability tests, analysing the data. And we have chapters and essays that cover that material, but they don't often stop to think, well, what defines good quality research? And there's one of those particular essays in there that I think is especially good. And I can say that because it was written by Philip rather than me. And it's called Thinking Like a Detective.
I knew you were going to pick that one. I'm looking at that one on my screen. Yes.
I think he does a fantastic job there of using a kind of a Sherlock Holmes analogy in order to understand what good research looks like. So I think that is one aspect of it that people might not expect to see. A second is that when we were creating the kind of the curriculum, the outline of the book, the first 5 chapters kind of naturally came together to do with setting the stage, planning UX research, conducting UX research, analysing UX research, and reporting the results or persuading people to take action on the results. Those sections came together fairly clearly. But we realised there was something missing, and I have a Facebook group where we have a group of people that take my Udemy courses, and they come in and they discuss stuff related to user experience. And one of the bigger drivers for them isn't so much how they plan the research and conduct the research; it's how do they build their career in user experience research. So we added a 6th section to the book with about half a dozen essays in to do with the qualities that we think a good user experience a researcher needs, and also a good user experience leader needs, and also kind of a way of people to be able to rate their own expertise in the field, a kind of a way for them to reflect on their own competencies and areas where they may be less strong, and that helps them then work out where they need to move to next. So I guess those would be those two sections, this one to do with setting the stage, this one to do with building a career, people might not expect. But I think the other thing that's unique about the book is the way it's structured. It's structured as a series of essays that people could pick up and kind of read when they're just having a coffee, or perhaps they're in the bath, hopefully not with their Kindle, perhaps with a printed copy of the book. But they just want something to read about the length of a long magazine article, like a New Yorker style article, but at the same time not so long that they need to bookmark it and then come back to it later. Because often, I don't know about you, Susan, Guthrie, I'm sure you're the same. If I look at my bookshelf, I've got 50, 60 user experience books on there, and I've read cover to cover probably 7 or 8 of those. Some of the others I've got certain well-thumbed sections, and there's others that I bought from Amazon. They came, and I had all the intention to read them, but I just couldn't get going with them. And what we wanted instead was a book that you didn't need to read cover to cover. Yeah. That you can pick it up and you can open it anywhere, and you could read an essay.
Find something interesting to read.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of matches the way we read these days, doesn't it? Because we tend to read more episodically because of the way we read articles on the internet. People are busier. If you're commuting, you don't often have time to read 50 or 60 pages. And as a consequence, the idea was to give people something they could pick up, read, and get something from. So it's not just to be entertained, although we're hoping that they would be entertained, but it's also that they can read something and it would question the way they practice user experience research, get them to reflect on it, and then and then when they commute back from work in the evening, they can turn to another part of the book. It doesn't need to be the next chapter, the next essay, or the previous essay, but anywhere in the book, and that will get them thinking again. So I guess that's the other unique thing. It's kind of the presentation of the book.
Yeah, it's great. And speaking of that last section, the building a career and user experience, I love the one on how to wow people with your UX research portfolio. Because I think, the whole question of, it's a big controversy right now in the field about having a portfolio, showing a portfolio, and how to do that effectively, and should you do that, and what can you show and divulge without violating the NDAs you signed and so on. But I think with UX research, it's, it can be particularly tricky. It's not as though, I think there's this idea, and I see my students struggle with this, or people I know in the field, because, suppose, I don't think you can show your UX interaction design work either easily in a portfolio, even if the NDAs weren't a problem. Where the work that we do, it's not like we can show, the homepage of a website, and that defines the work that we do.
I think it also ignores the fact that I predominantly work with Scrum teams. Yeah. And what I do more at the moment, is really around coaching UX researchers on those teams in order to work effectively. But I've also done my fair share of working as the UX researcher on those teams. And at the end of the day, when you look at a thing that's been designed, whether it's a screen or an interaction or a product, it's very difficult to say, well, this is the bit that I did.
Right.
Because
you can't do that. So I think there's, and then add to that, with UX research, there might not really be anything to look at.
Yes.
So,
and I think that there's this focus. And one reason that UX researchers are wary of portfolios is they have the belief that it needs to be visual. It needs to be like a portfolio that an artist would put together. Right. When really, it's a series of case studies.
It's stories. You need to tell stories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those, when you're working in consultancy, you're very used to the idea of putting case studies together as part of a proposal to show the client that you understand the business that they're in and you've done similar work in the past. And there's no reason why UX researchers can't adopt that model as well and provide case studies telling the story of their their work on a particular project. And of course, they may also be able to introduce some visuals as well.
Correct.
Although hopefully not the cliched shot of people in front of a whiteboard moving sticky notes around.
Post-it notes around.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what we need. More stock photography of people with Post-it notes. Yeah, I think that's important too. Well, it's it's a great book, and I'm really glad you guys wrote it. And I hope people listening will check it out, because I think that there are a lot of UX books out these days, a lot compared to many years ago, and there are more and more UX research books out. But I think it's still, if you think about how many books about UX research are there compared to just books about UX, there's not as many on UX research. So, and I think I think the style you used of as you said, the New Yorker article is unique and is a great idea.
Great, thank you.
All right. So anything else you want to tell us about the book, though, before we leave that topic?
Actually, one thing. When the book was first published, in order to encourage people to purchase the book early, we offered some bonus materials to people that bought the book. The bonus material comprised a video from me talking about, basically it's the video of the book. It's like a half an hour video, a bit like an online seminar describing the book. But we also included some material, including an exercise you can play with your design team to do with user experience maturity, a couple of extra essays we couldn't fit in the book, and there was some other material as well that we included in this bonus pack. And we took it down after a month or so. But I'm thinking for your readership or your listenership, if any of them purchase the book as a result of listening to the podcast, if they contact me by email, I'll give them access to the bonus material, because I still have it. It's just taken down from the website where it was initially. So a special offer only for your podcast.
Only
listeners.
For Human Tech podcast listeners.
Exactly.
I love it. Okay, that's a great idea. Thank you, David.
They need to buy the book in order to get access to the materials. Right. But
if they buy the book and then send you an email, so where should they? What's your email address?
So it's david.travis@userfocus.co.uk.
Okay. Wonderful.
Awesome.
All right. So tell us where you said you're headed off on a trip. Is this a work trip, a fun trip?
Yeah, no, it's a work trip.
Where are you headed?
So I'm heading to Glasgow to work with a client for a few days, coaching their Scrum team in how to go about using user experience methods on products. And it's really the kind of thing that I spend most of my time doing, really. So it's helping a team that are keen to get into the field of user experience, probably haven't done it before. Maybe there'll be somebody on the team that knows a little bit about it. There'll be somebody that knows very little. And the idea is to kind of bring them all up to speed using this common terminology that we've talked about, like choice architecture, for example, and making sure that they understand the fundamental processes that they go through. So that's where I'm going. That's where I'm headed next.
And do you do much speaking at conferences?
Do you know, I don't. You mentioned conferences earlier, and I used to go to CHI and the UXPA, and I typically the best conferences were non-UK based, so they required a lot of travel. Now that's changed over the last few years because there are some good conferences to attend in the UK. But one of the things I struggle with, I don't enjoy giving conference presentations. They're second in my hate list only to writing a book.
Really? See, now that surprises me because you like to teach.
Well, yeah, well, I like teaching groups of people that are less than 20. So if it's an audience of ideally about a dozen people, it's perfect because it's like a conversation. It's like the conversation we're having at the moment. I'm a kind of a more of a workshop leader than a lecturer. But when you speak at a conference, so I'm speaking at a conference next month. It's called the Behavior and Design Conference.
Oh yeah, I know that. I haven't been to that conference, but I know of that conference.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's going to be 500 people there in the audience.
So this has already got you sweating.
Exactly, yeah, because I know I'm going to get up on stage and the lights will be on me and I won't be able to see anybody's face in the audience. And I will just have to talk for 30 minutes or so about my chosen topic, which interestingly is the future of UX research and how to stop it. And I'll be talking about that topic, but I'll be at the same time, I'm just going to be. It takes so much time preparing for these talks as well.
Guthrie and I do a lot of speaking. We like speaking.
Yeah, put me in front of a giant.
We recently did a talk in front of like 3,000 people, and that was a good size. We like that. So, but I do have, maybe not for this conference, I have just, I have 2 ideas for you to consider for the future that maybe would help in terms of speaking. If you don't mind me being.
Oh, I'd love to hear them.
So first of all, I do mentoring in speaking and presentations, and I have a book on presentations. So this is something I actually love. But two things that we have done recently that, we didn't have a problem before, but we really kind of have enjoyed these 2 new things we've added. One is we're on stage often together, and that is very fun. It's fun for us. The audiences have told us they love it, that it's hilarious, that they really enjoy it. And I think one of the reasons, so perhaps in the future you can think about getting, a buddy to be on stage with you, because then you can have a conversation. It's not just you talking. The 2 of you can also talk together and back and forth. And that makes it it's just a different thing for you as a speaker, and the audience seems to really enjoy that. They enjoy this idea of dropping in on a conversation and listening.
That's a great idea. I'll get Philip Hodgson over, and then he can do all of the work.
Yeah, that he can do all the work. He can create all the slides, and then you can just go on stage and talk to him. And then the other thing you might want to think about is something that Guthrie and I have also experimented with that we really like and the audience really likes, which is we have shortened our presentations, which actually makes it harder to put together one, but we've shortened our presentations and lengthened our Q&A. And so we spend sometimes, not always, but sometimes a significant portion, like if we have a hour-long talk, we'll spend 25 minutes of it on Q&A. And it means that it is more of a conversation, right? Because and this especially works well in some of the large conferences are doing this, where they the Q&A is people type in questions and they appear on the screen. So you don't have to do the whole, get the microphone out to the audience. Logistically, it's just easier. But it means that it's fun. You never know what you're going to get asked, right? But it means, again, it's more of a conversation. So it's as though someone said to you, well, what do you do about such and such, right? And then you just answer that question and kind of have a conversation about that question. And so there's it's just more fun. It allows it to be more conversational. And again, I think the audience really likes that the spontaneous nature of it.
I like that idea, and I think the reason is the one reason I like doing training courses is because very quickly, within a minute, I'm speaking with people and getting them to talk to me and tell me about their background and so on.
Yes.
And then you feel that you've broken the ice. But because I always like to start my presentations off when I'm speaking to a bigger audience, I like to have have a joke early on, because once I've said the joke and people laugh, then immediately I'm relaxed because I know that they're engaged. The worst thing is when you come up with the joke and then there's just like this ripple of kind of sympathetic laughter from the audience, and then that makes it worse because then I've got to say something. Then you get more desperate to come up with another joke.
All right, David, we've got to work on this. We're going to have another phone call well, maybe we will have people listen in. I don't know. We'll we'll help you with this. But if you don't like, some people just aren't thrilled with speaking. I guess Guthrie and I are lucky that it's something that we really
It's just
enjoy.
'cause I like to be all important.
Really? That's why you like speaking?
Yeah, everyone's
I
looking
don't
at
think
you.
so. I don't think
They're
that's
hanging
true.
on your every word.
No, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's why you like it.
I think it's just the attention. I really just think it's the
Really?
attention.
That's so funny. All right, David, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. I hope that we can maybe even do some work together in the future. I think given our background and our mindset, it kind of makes sense. So I think we should maybe explore that.
I'd like to. I feel I've got to know you both so well over the last few days listening to all of your
Listening
podcasts.
to the podcast. And again, let's give some information out. David, if people want to reach you, they should reach you where?
So by email would be david.travis@userfocus.co.uk, or they could get me on Twitter. I'm at userfocus on Twitter, and that would be the easiest way, I guess, to get me.
Okay, so everyone check out his book, contact him, follow him on Twitter, and you can learn some great stuff about UX research. Guthrie, anything you want to add? You want to take us out?
Yeah, sure. Just thanks to everyone for everything, and email info@theteamw.com if you have any questions. Is there anything else that I need to add?
I don't think so. I think we're good.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.